Nestled beyond frozen peaks lies Wintergrad, once a bastion of eastern elegance, now a snow-choked fortress under siege. Survivors rally behind the ancient battlements, defying the rising tide of necromantic corruption and the fearsome Khan abomination, a monstrous warlord risen from legend. This is Zombicide White Death, the latest in the fantasy Zombicide setting. I'm James Bruce and you're watching Tabletop Dungeon. So this review is aimed at mainly existing Zombicide fans. I'm going to talk about some gameplay elements, but only those that are new in this version. I'm not going to go over the basics of how to play Zombicide. So if you're completely new to the game, another video might be more helpful. I'm going to assume some experience with previous Zombicide games. In terms of setting, White Death has a sort of snowy Asian theme set in the grounds of a castle. I suppose we could call this the Great Wall. I don't know. And two of the characters in the base game are in fact animals, like Ogon the tiger. So if you have a furry in your game group, I'm sure they're going to like that. There's also loads more furries in the Kickstarter promo box, by the way, so keep an eye on the channel. I'll be doing a furry-only gameplay video. So what's new in Zombicide White Death? Well, first is corruption. Core to the game concept is corruption, spawned in with the Defiler Necromancer. Now, unlike previous versions of the game, the Necromancer himself doesn't move. Rather, on his turn, the corruption moves and spreads across the map, along with a spawn point towards the mission beacon, and that's a sort of generic beacon. I guess it might represent someone important or an object, depending on the mission, but either way, the corruption spreads, it chases it down, going towards it, destroys everything in its path, and crucially provides new spawn points for walkers on particular spawn cards. Then we have the wall. These are the 3D battlements add-on that I got here, by the way, not in the base game, but you can also 3D print some. There's a great set of models floating around to internet. But essentially the wall gives you a vantage point to shoot from and somewhat protects you from the hordes down below. However, again, some cards allow them to climb up the walls, and abominations can just jump up, they don't care. Corruption tokens will also destroy the walls. Now, also new, you might notice, are these guys, which aren't zombies. They're actually friendly NPC guards that can be controlled. So once per turn, you can issue a command to one or a group of them in one zone to move or attack, basically. The stats are not great, but, you know, get a group of them together and you can do some real damage, as well as some extra skills that other characters bring to the table, like Ogon imbues them with the ability to shove zombies out of their zone. So, although they're not that powerful, they are incredibly useful because you can basically bark commands at a group of guards from anywhere on the map. So it means that if you've been tasked with, say, getting some objective or just searching, and you inevitably have one action left that would otherwise be wasted until now, well, now you can use it to do something useful, to attack or to move some of the guards somewhere else on the board. It just adds a bit more variety to your action choices. There's also wall defenses in the game in the form of boiling hot cauldrons of oil. Now, these take 3 actions to shift from a character to move them or to throw them all over the wall, or you can use a group of 3 guards to do the job for you. Also new is the freeze mechanic, allowing you to freeze all actors in a zone for 1 turn. It's handy for managing hordes and getting out of a tight spot. Vault weapons, of course, make a return, but now abominations and the necromancer drop them when they die, so they are in some ways much easier to get hold of, though you do still need to physically go out there and fetch them. They don't sort of automatically drop into the inventory of whoever killed the abomination. So that was in brief what's new. What's to love about White Death? Rather than just another reskinning of Zombicide, White Death does feel like a fresh new experience, particularly with a more sort of tower defense style mechanic. While previous versions you would generally go from point A to point B, survive and collect stuff on the way, White Death is very much more about, right, I'll hold the line, you venture outside the walls and deal with these bad guys or fetch this thing. You work on stopping the corruption, she'll save that guy, he'll control the defenses, and more often than not, a combination of all of those roles shifting around as the game continues. So there's a lot more strategic depth to the gameplay and opportunities for your characters to shine, controlling the guards, defending the walls, dealing with the corruption. All of these elements add depth to the gameplay without being individually overwhelmingly complicated. In terms of components, it's the same great quality it's always been. But what I also really appreciate is the thought that they've put into existing owners of Fantasy Zombicide. CMON included replacement abomination cards for the original sort of Green Horde and those expansions, etc. Now, if you don't have those miniatures, I mean, it's okay because you could just find something to represent it. The inclusion of those cards is very much appreciated though, but they also thought about original game survivors who lack, say, guard skills. So there's a small deck of guard skill cards which you can draw from, and those will replace either a blue or yellow skill from the old survivor, meaning that your older characters aren't locked out of the new version of the game. So even if you did get that enormous box of Kickstarter extras with White Death, you might still have some cool minis from previous campaigns that you're able to make use of in White Death. And I think that's a really nice touch and a good nod to fans. While there's nothing massively new on the item front, there are now pole arms, which are sort of ranged melee weapons. This is actually something we saw in modern 2nd edition Paris expansion first, because you can poke at zombies without having to run into combat with them. Very useful. Some people have said that the guards feel a little bit too fragile and get little action. I love them as a player though. They can be powerful if you prepare by bunching them up a little bit and then you release a hail of arrows at once. They're very situational, and perhaps that's a good thing. There's also a campaign expansion to enjoy. This is a concept they first introduced in 2nd edition Modern. It has new mechanics in the form of chi powers. It even has a new zombie type, some more survivors, a replacement item deck with keep mechanics between missions, but more importantly, an overarching narrative campaign that replaces the generic objective tokens in the core game with narrative cards. And there's a certain degree of character progression too. So you can level up and choose new skills that you keep between missions, though the core of your character, the XP, the blue, yellow, orange skills that you earn, those reset every game. So what's not to love about White Death? It is a lot harder, and taken as a whole, it is more complicated. The corruption tokens alone are not complicated. The walls aren't that hard to understand, neither are the guards. But when you throw all of that into a new game, it's going to take some getting used to. Part of the reason it's a lot harder is because it can feel even more swingy than before. When Zombicide Green Horde added the horde mechanic of tons of zombies amassing off the board, it also added catapults to deal with them. There was a balance of sorts. With the corruption spawns in White Death, where every corruption zone gets one zombie on it, particularly in the later game, of course, when the corruption has perhaps spread to half the board, and taken multiple paths to the beacon, it can suddenly spawn a lot of zombies, and there is no real counter to that, it feels like. Another very minor point is that unless you bought the plastic tokens pack as well, there doesn't seem to be enough corruption for some missions in the base game. That said, if you do run out, you can just use pieces of broccoli instead. The only other major criticism of White Death is something that all CMON games suffer from, and that's the Kickstarter FOMO, which I kind of don't want to tell you about, because if you missed out on the extras, I mean, I would be kicking myself. I will happily admit to being a sucker for the CMON FOMO strategy. It works. And I've pretty much backed for a full pledge on most Zombicide editions so far, excluding DC because I couldn't care less about Superman, and Dead or Alive because the Wild West theme just didn't appeal. But there's so much cool stuff in the White Death promos box. It's been really hard just playing the core game for this review, while it stares at me with the 100-odd extra characters and abominations. Now, on the other hand, there are a bunch of expansions you can get that aren't Kickstarter exclusive, so it's not like you're ever going to run out of content. So should you get White Death? I mean, it's still Zombicide, it's still fantasy, and if you're completely burnt out on Zombicide, then this probably isn't going to reinvigorate your love of the game. It might just be time to, I don't know, play something else. If you're a dedicated Zombicide fan like I am, well, then you probably backed the Kickstarter anyway, and might just be considering whether to open it or leave it in your box of shame, or just sell it on. Then I would definitely say open it, play it, you'll love it, lots of new mechanics. White Death has ramped the difficulty up and increased the tension. It comes down to the wire a lot more. I find now you need to play more strategically. While previous versions were very much more beer and pretzels gameplay of run around, chuck a bunch of dice, White Death feels like you're going to have to actually think about things a lot more. So if you found strategy somewhat lacking in prior Zombicides, I think you're going to love this. Of course, with news that Simon has now sold the Zombicide franchise to Asmodee, this could be the last Zombicide we see for a while, at least in this particular format. Nobody knows where it will go from here, but I think White Death is a stunning entry in the series. I feel like saying best Zombicide yet is probably overused, and I've also probably said that about every Zombicide that comes out, but like, for real, this time it is. If this review helped you to make your mind up about White Death, hit like and consider subscribing. Hit me up in the comments with any feedback or questions that you have. Also check out my other White Death related video where myself and my Chinese wife take you through the pronunciation of all of the characters in the Kickstarter promo box, mostly Chinese and Japanese. Some of those names can be really tricky, and if you want to not butcher the pronunciation when you're playing with them, that video is for you. And stay tuned because we will be doing a full playthrough video of some of the expansion anyway. We might die halfway through. Until next time, stay frosty.